Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to present on HIV/AIDS Studies 2. My name is Michael Mlondo, and the code is HS20S2. We are going to look at the aspects of gender, HIV/AIDS, and then also at the impact assessment survey. How you do surveys, what different assessments are available when you do a survey on HIV/AIDS. And then also, when you are implementing programs or activities, how do you monitor and how do you evaluate those programs? Then we are also going to look at finances or budgeting. Looking specifically is how do you budget for HIV programs when you want to implement this program within a community. To budget is very important, and you don't just need the budget, you also need funding, and we're going to cover funding and how do you write proposal, what needs to be in a grant, and how do you look for funding, especially for your program. And then the aspect of orphans and vulnerable children, which are very important. And then we are going to look at governance and HIV/AIDS management. So on the issue of gender and HIV/AIDS, gender is having different definition. Different people, depends on your school of thought or where you're coming from, is how you perceive gender is differently. But let me just explain to you there are a definition which I think most of you will agree with me. Gender is looking at the rules, the norms, the customs, the practices of male and female. And gender is also looking at the biological differences of male and female and how those differences are translated and interpreted within the context of a community. Then also looking at the difference, the social difference of a girl and a boy, and what is expected from that girl and a boy within a community. So when we look at gender, as I say, we are looking at the sexes, we are looking at the roles, and of course the difference between men and women. The other thing is, when it comes to gender is an HIV/AIDS, we have to look at the equality. Does the law in your country or the law in Namibia consider women and men the same? Boys and girls, are they treated the same? Is there equality? And when we look at equality, we have to look at opportunity, and how does the law within the country interpret equality between men and women, or men and women? And then are there opportunities? If opportunity are available, are those opportunities equal for men and for women? Then the other element of gender is vulnerability. The likelihood for women to be infected with HIV, it's quite high because of the vulnerability of women in the context of a relationship, and in that relationship where there is violence. And biologically, we see men are more stronger than women, and when you look at in the context of culture and norms, that men are normally the leading figures, or they are the head of the household. And the other vulnerability for women also is the aspects of rape, sexual abuse. Women are very vulnerable because the man is a stronger one. Not that men are not being raped, but in most of the cases, women are actually much more vulnerable. The other element of gender is the aspect of femininity, and this look at the qualities or the characteristic of girls and women. And it's very important to understand that when it comes to gender, the role of feminine or female is quite more important. And this is where we want to look at the aspects of femininity. Masculinity is also another element when it comes to gender. As I've explained earlier, looking at the definition of gender, it covers both the roles, the characteristic of male and female. So when we look at femininity, we look at woman. Then when we look at masculinity, we look at boys and of course also to men. And these are the qualities and the characteristics that are associated to men and women, men and boys when it comes to masculinity. So the other element on gender and HIV is what we have to look at is gender gap. And as all of you know, when we look at our socio-economic factors, especially culture, in some of the cultures, and there are certain practices and norms which actually constitute gaps within female and female. And in most of these instances, boys and men are more at an advanced stage. They benefit more when it comes to the roles of male and female. So there is quite a gap when it comes to gender. The other aspect or elements is discrimination. Some cultures and some norms or practices, they always or sometimes, most of the time, discriminate women, and it puts women at a very disadvantaged position than men, and especially when it comes to opportunities and how we treat female or woman. So the issue of discrimination is quite rampant and evident. The other element of gender is we are looking at oppression, which goes hand in hand with discrimination, because in most cases where you look at at decision making, and especially in a relationship, you will find that the male or the man is the one that makes the final decision, and in which suppressed the opinions of women when in a relationship, and women experience a situation of oppression where they can't have their own thoughts, or they can't say how they feel, or share their opinion. And when it comes to gender, it's quite sensitive where you experience the phenomenon of gender oppression. Then the other aspect of gender is the element of sexual harassment at the workplace, where male are very dominant in the workplace, and they feel that they have the right to harass a woman, and especially when it comes to where the male is, or the person is in a superior position or in a senior position, and the victim is always the subordinate or in a lower position, where the senior person normally harassed the junior or the person that's subordinate or subjected to this person. And this is quite rampant. It's happening all over the world. It's a global sickness where harassment, and most of these cases of sexual harassment are not reported, that are not known, but it's happening. And these are the elements of gender which we have to look at. The other aspect or element of gender is gender-based violence, and where you have, we call it in Namibia, passion killing, which I feel it's the wrong word, where people kill because of passion. And this is normally in a relationship where male and female are in an intimate relationship. And the perpetrator, or the one that's abusing the other, it's always the person that's closest or intimate. So you have this intimate partner violence syndrome all over the world, and this is where the aspect of gender comes in. So if you look at those two slides, you will see, for an example, how male perceive themselves that they have the right to abuse their girlfriend or the female. And then, of course, you have got the other scenario where the man is the submissive one, and then you have the woman that's more extrovert and more outgoing, and you also have those aspects where the female also abuse the male. So these are the aspects when it comes to gender-based violence and the issue of gender. So coming back to HIV/AIDS, you have to do an assessment. If you want to see, if you implement a program and you want to look at the impact of your of the implementation or your action plan, it's always good at the end of the implementation or at the end of the program or the project, you have to look back and do an assessment to see whether your plan or your project made a difference in somebody's life or in the community. Was there any impact? And when we look at impact, we are looking at did the project achieve its objective, and was there any difference? What effect did the program or the project get on the community or an individual? Did it change behavior? Did it change the mindset? So these are some of the components when it comes to impact assessment. So there are different kind of assessment that you find. You have the environmental impact assessment. You've got the environmental health impact assessment. You've got the health impact assessment. So all these different assessment are needed, and these are only 3 examples of assessment that you can have or you can actually use as a tool to do a survey and also assessment within the community itself. So when it comes to implementation, as I've explained earlier, is you have this project and you have this program, and the project covers a span of 12 months or 1 year. So the aspect of monitoring and evaluation is very important when it comes to implementation. Now, when we look at monitoring and evaluation, the only difference is monitoring is done during the implementation of the activity, and evaluation is then done at the end of the project cycle or at the end of the program. So the purpose of monitoring and evaluation is you want to learn from past experience. And after you have learned from past experience, then you want to improve if you have given service delivery. And if you want to improve, then you can plan properly, you can plan actually for the future, and this can help you also to have appropriate allocation of resources and services. So monitoring evaluation is very important for past experience, improvement of service delivery, planning and allocation of resources. So there are 3 types of evaluation that you can do. There is the process evaluation, which is normally done during the activity implementation of the project or the program, and it also measures whether the monthly activity or the ongoing activity is achieving the goal or the objective of the project. Then you've got the outcome evaluation, which also measures the progress, but it looks at the overall. It looks at did this program achieve the goals or the objectives. And then, of course, as I say, the impact evaluation is looking, did the program or the project that you're implementing in the community, did it make any difference, or did it make any impact on the community or in the lives of individuals? So we are coming now to budgeting. When you are going to implement a program or activity within the community, you need money. And to have money, you need to have a proper budget. You need to know how much money do you need to make this program or this project successful. And just to define what budget is a list of planned expenses and activities, what you want to do. How much money do you need to spend? And if you're going to spend money, is how much do you need to save? And of course, do you need to project. So a budget is actually a document where you translate your plans into money. So money is needed when it comes to program implementation or to implement an activity within a community. So why do you need a budget? It will help you, especially when it comes to spending. You will have a tool, which means it's a budget, where you can manage your spending. You can manage the outcome of the program. So it's a very good tool always to refer, especially when you want to manage the spending of the money. And it will also tell you, as the project is going on, how much money do you have, how much money do you spend, and how much money do you need for the future. So it is an effective tool to have a budget, and it also enables the organization to monitor its spending, its activity, and then also to budget accordingly for the future. So what is the purpose of budgeting? It helps with forecasting, which means you plan for the future. So if you don't plan for the future, then you are actually planning to fail. There is a very good saying that says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is where budget is very important when it comes to program or project implementation. So there are different types of budget. I'm just going to name them. I'm not going to explain them, as there is budget, which we call government budget. Government needs to budget. Then there are corporate budget, which are private sectors or private company. They need to have budget. Sales budget, production budget, cash flow budget. So these are only a few examples that you have in different settings. But when it comes to budget, it's very important that you have to know that when you budget, you have to make sure that you have to budget. So once you have a budget and you know this is the amount of money that you need for your project or for your program for this year or for the next 12 months. Now the question most people are asking, where do I get the money? Because most project or most program, when they want to implement a program or a project, is they don't have the funding. Are you going to get the money from the bank? Are you going to approach a donor? Are you going to approach a private entity? Now, the question is, where do you get money? And one of the ways to get money is you need to have a funding proposal or a proposal. A proposal actually only means it's a document which includes, some people say it's a business plan that you have, which include a proposal, which you take to a bank or to a financier or to a donor, and which a donor can then read and say, this is the money you need, how are you going to spend the money, and how are you going to make sure that the money is spent accordingly. So this is the reason why a funding proposal is very much more important. So there are different kind of guidelines that you have to look through, which are quite important. Before you are going to write a funding proposal, you first need to make sure that you understand the guidelines of the donor or the funder. If you want to get money from a bank for your project, is every bank or any donor or a funder, they've got their own guidelines how they're going to give you the money. So you have to read and and become familiar with the guidelines of the donor or the bank itself. So once you have read those guidelines, then secondly is you have to make sure that you have enough time to write the proposal. The mistake that many people are doing is once they write a proposal, they only write it the day before the submission. So you need to write your proposal far ahead before the deadline of the proposal. So it's preferably recommended, or it is recommended, that once you write a proposal, you have to write it far advance before the deadline, so that you can have enough time to write and prepare the proposal itself. The third guideline area which you have to look at is you need to consider whether the grant is right for your organization, because there are some funding which are not appropriate for HIV. If you are in the field of HIV, for an example, you cannot go to a donor or to a funder that only gives money to agriculture. And then if you write a proposal for agriculture, but you know that your organization needs money for HIV, then it will put you in a dilemma, because the money that you want to use, it's not meant for what your organization wants to implement. So it's very important that if you are going to implement or approach a donor or a funder, you have to make sure that that donor or that funding is right for that organization, because it's not just about the donor or the funding, but it's also about how you're going to use the money. And at the end of the project, it's all about having a relationship with your donor, and then you have to discuss your proposal with your donor or the funder before you write it, if possible. And then it's very important, once you have the donor money, or even before you write the proposal, it's always good to twin or to partner with another organization that's doing a similar program or a similar project, because once a donor sees that there is a collaboration or cooperation between 2 or 3 organizations, then the likelihood for them, for the donor to give you the money, it's quite good, because the aspect of sustainability and risk management is very important for any donor. And when they see collaboration between multiple of organizations, it actually makes the donor to have faith in the proposal itself. So there are the basic elements which you have to look through when you are going to write a proposal. So these are just basic elements or the component of a proposal. And as I said in my earlier slide, is when you approach the donor, you have to find out what are the guidelines of the proposal. And each donor or each funder, they've got their own guidelines and what they expect, what needs to be in the proposal. So these are only the elements that we think we propose that you need to have within the proposal. The first thing is you need to have an executive summary, which actually is a synopsis or an abstract, explain, or it gives a whole view about what the program is all about, the project, what you want to use it for. And then the second one you have to look at is the problem. What is the problem? How are you going to address the problem? Why is this problem significant to this program? What makes this problem different than the other problems? And then it needs to come out very strong, and you have to state it to convince the funder or the donor that they have to fund this proposal. And then you have to look at the program itself. How are you going to implement this program? And when you are going to look at the implementation of the program, the donor wants to know is what are you going to implement the solution? When are you going to implement this program? Where are you going to implement this program? Why do you implement this program? And if you're going to implement this program, how are you going to implement this program? So it's very important when you look at all of this, that in your project proposal, the what, the when, the who, the where, the why, the how is very important. It needs to come out in your proposal. Then the funder wants to know is how are you going to evaluate your plan or your program or your project. Remember I talked about monitoring and evaluation earlier. So they want to come, the donor wants to see is how are you going to monitor your plan? How are you going to evaluate the impact of this plan? So it's very important that you need an aspect of an evaluation, and it needs to be very clear to the donor. Then a budget is very important. You need to, of course, explain is how are you going to spend and the money, how much money do you need, and this is where the budget come in. And then in your proposal, you need to have an appendix, an attachment, where the donor might require you to attach the registration of your organization. They want to see your constitution, for an example. Some donors, they have a checklist of things which they need, which needs to accompany your proposal. So it's very important that you have to make sure with the donor is that what does your proposal needs to accompany it with, and what do you need to include in your proposal. So the aspect of OVC is very important in this and why do I mention that is orphans and vulnerable children is at the heart of most of the donors, because these are the future of any country, and it's very important to understand and to know that the children have rights, and you have to look at the needs and how the rights of children needs to be protected. So there are different areas that you have to look at that has an effect on OVCs. Economic, which means orphans and vulnerable children are poor, which means it's an economic problem, and these are some of the area which your proposal or your project needs to look at or focus on. The other factor that also influence orphans and vulnerable children is education. Many of these children, because of the economic status, they can't go to school, and because the parents can't pay school fees, there is no food, and it affects their education. And then doesn't just affect the education, but also their social status. So there are also social factors that which means that the society can ostracize them or discriminate them just because of the status being orphans and vulnerable children. And of course, it will have a psychological effect on these children. So the last chapter that I want to look at is governance. If you are going to work with HIV program and are going to manage organization or a company that's dealing with HIV/AIDS, governance is very important. And governance, or the principle of governance, is so important that it's not about just managing an organization, but it's how you are managing the organization. So we are going to look at different areas that are very important for good governance. If you look there at the slide, you will see these are the areas or the characteristic of good governance. Is the area we are looking at: accountability, transparency, responsive equality, equitability, inclusiveness, effectiveness, efficiency, and we're also going to look at how to have consensus. Now, if we go in detail, these are the characteristics that makes up a good governance. The first one is the rule of law, which means that any organization needs to operate in the area, or within the constitutions or the Constitution of Namibia. And it's very important that the rule of law needs to be adhered. They need to reinforce. So the other characteristic is transparency, which means there needs to be a free flow of information. The organization needs to be open with its employees. Consensus, whatever decision needs to be made within the organization, consensus needs to be reached, which means everyone needs to agree on the decision that's been made. Responsiveness, if your constituency or your employee needs feedback, it's very important that you have to give feedback in a timely way, and you have to be responsive when it comes to feedback. And then also participation. When you are going to make decision, or you want to decide on anything, it's very important that everybody needs to participate. And then when everybody participates, they need to know that they have the freedom. Equity and inclusiveness is very important. Everyone is equal to make decision. Everyone needs to be included, and the organization needs to be effective enough, efficient enough, and of course the organization or your company is accountable to everyone, and not just responsible, but you have to report to ever. So these are the characteristics when it comes to governance and HIV/AIDS, which are quite very important for any organization. So I will then recommend and encourage you that you will look at your IOL study guide and manual for more information, and I hope that you will be ready for your exams and then also for your assignments.